This story begins with the girl reading a novella on the way to a family trip, and is delighted that one of the characters has finally died. She didn't like him much because after his sister died, he wished the same for everyone else. At that moment, the girl was approached by her father, who did not like the fact that she was busy with something and did not talk to them. Eri asks how long they have to go, but so far the girl has no idea that it doesn't even matter anymore, because this is the last moment she sees her parents, and is in her own body. Very soon, in a few minutes, a new reality awaits her. As the girl closed her eyes and fell asleep, she felt sorry for that tyrant. And if his sister Chloe had been a little different, things would have been quite different. In the dream, she wondered what it would be like to lose someone close to you, when suddenly, the very moment that changed her life forever, she heard some unfamiliar voices, and it felt like she was in a different body and place, because the last thing she saw before she went to sleep was them going on a road trip. And the endless road in front of me. Eri even thought she was dead, or it was just a bad dream, as suddenly, she felt that she felt different. She could not move or speak, and there were strangers all around her. It was a very different society from the one she had been in before. The people around her are in costume. The room looks like some kind of palace, and it's a far cry from her normal life. And from that moment on, she starts to realize that she's not Eri anymore. As she began to look at the people around her, the girl concluded that they looked like Europeans, and she also had a very strange feeling, like she was right next to them, but at the same time, she wasn't being paid attention to. When suddenly, the person she was next to was addressed as an emperor. After that, she heard a very familiar voice. The girl still decided to look at this man, but for some reason, she couldn't even move and turn her head in his direction. And then, she recognized that her voice didn't sound at all, as if something was suppressing it, and she couldn't speak. Suddenly the emperor touched her, which the girl did not expect, because she did not understand what was going on here, and why she could not move. Afterwards the emperor touched her hair, and called her by the name of Chloe. But she only knows one Chloe, and it's not her real-life friend, it's a character in the story. When all of a sudden this guy starts stroking her head, she was beginning to wonder why she'd just been called Chloe, and what this guy looked like. But after she remembered the short story she'd read on the way in the car, it all made sense to her at once. The girl ended up in the novel, and she was reborn as Chloe. In the story, Declan, Chloe's older brother who died when she was a baby, he always loved her very much. Her death was an unexpected shock to him. Because of this, he with his own hands destroyed his older brother, the main contender for the throne after his father, and thus, Declan became emperor at a young age. Unable to shake off the wounds of the past, Declan became obsessed with a doll left behind by Chloe. After her death, his only goal in life is to get revenge on everyone involved in his sister's death. Rumored to be aided by the cursed doll he kept with him all the time, Declan began to lose the support of the people around him. And as a result, he must be destroyed by longtime friend Mason Buckle, the protagonist of the original novel. But there was only one question. At what point in the plot is the girl? Because Declan is alive and well, and apparently she appeared before the moment when he should die. And also, she still hasn't seen her appearance because she can't do it on her own. Declan just called her Chloe, but when Declan became emperor, Chloe was already dead. No matter how hard she tried to move, she could not. The girl began to feel as if she were not a person, but an object. But there was only one explanation for all this. She turned into the same cursed doll left by his dead sister. The girl couldn't believe it for a long time. She didn't understand why, of all the roles in the story, she got the damn doll, because it's not even a real person, and a character who can't even move or talk, but not just any character, but a doll possessed by a horrible tyrant. Girl didn't understand why it didn't happen so that she could become, for instance, the main character Stella, or at the very least Jennifer, who is the villain, or at least a maid, because even she is a normal human being, not some doll who can't do anything. She did not understand why things were so unfair, and why she of all roles had become an inanimate object of the plus who's forced to be around a tyrant. At one point, he turned to her and said he realized she felt the same way. But the girl didn't say anything, and didn't understand why he was acting so strange. As suddenly, he got very angry for some reason, and it felt like he was about to do something that no one was expecting. Perhaps he didn't like someone's words or behavior that was disrespectful to him. The people who were sitting at the table stood up at once, for they were greatly startled when he changed his mood abruptly and looked in their direction, and then he started walking towards them. You could tell he was clearly unhappy about something. He was immediately tried to be calmed down and asked what exactly he didn't like about it, when suddenly Declan told some guy that just now, Chloe told him to destroy him right now. But in fact, she never actually said anything like that. And when she heard about it, she didn't understand what was going on. And yet, she couldn't explain any of it. The only thing she wanted at that moment was for it to stop, because Declan was being too unpredictable. Chloe began to assume that after this, these guys will want to destroy her, because they think that she gives the Emperor such terrible advice. After that, she looked at the other guy, and since he apparently had a high status, she started to hope that he could do something about it. When suddenly, another guy turned to the Emperor, because he had something to say. He asked not to do anything rash, because after such a thing, there could be unpleasant consequences. To which Declan replied that he didn't need anyone's advice, and besides, no one had the right to tell him what was right or wrong. Then Chloe seemed to recognize the guy, or remembered his name was Mason Buckle. She recognized him because he had blonde hair and blue eyes. She saw him as a very handsome guy. In the novella, Love Blossoming in the Ruins, he is the main character. He is one of the main ones in the Empire, and also, Mason is a close friend of Declan's. In other words, this guy is the only one who can stop him and influence his decision. Chloe doubted that in this situation he would have something to do, because this tyrant is impossible to calm down. He's the kind of person who thinks he's the only one who has the right opinion, and being the Emperor makes him even more confident, so it's best not to argue with him. In this situation, Mason's the only hope, but unfortunately, it looks like he's powerless right now, and he probably realizes it himself. When suddenly he did decide to do one very brave thing, and turned to Declan at the most dangerous moment. He told him that the princess obviously wouldn't want that to happen, and if she were alive right now, she would try to stop him. So he better not do that, because he made a promise. At this point, those two guys were very surprised at Mason's boldness. They were sure he would very much regret trying to stop the Emperor, though they should be grateful to him instead. When suddenly, just as Declan asked to be out of the way, Mason reminded him that he was usually having a tea party with the princess at this hour. And apparently it worked. Declan stopped being so aggressive and remembered that it really is tea time. So he immediately changed all his plans and went to a very beautiful place that was perfect for a tea party. And of course he went there with Chloe. Declan talked to her like she was a real person and said that Mason was right, because how could he forget about having tea with Chloe? Plus, it's way more important to him than dealing and figuring things out with this guy who doesn't even deserve his attention. Then, he showed the girl some flowers that she liked very much. It turns out he had brought them especially for her to enjoy and admire them. Chloe still can't get used to the fact that she's a doll, and the Emperor is talking to her and talking about bringing her her favorite flowers for her. She didn't understand how you could talk to a doll, bring her favorite flowers to the palace, and offer to taste her favorite cookies. She can't do it anyway, because she's not a real person, and his behavior only shows that he has some problems, because he's talking to a doll, and even makes up some of her advice that she didn't actually give. Declan asked her if she liked the cookies, to which the girl was very surprised. After all he could see, she hadn't tasted any of them. Maybe he's just imagining that his sister is actually in front of him, and thus just trying to believe that she's still alive, and talking to the doll. He's just calming himself down. Chloe's trying to accept it, but in those moments when he asks her something, she feels really weird, because she doesn't understand the point of asking her anything if she can't answer anyway. Sometimes she can be really scared, because when she realizes that this person is talking to a doll and imagines that it's his real sister, she wants to run away and never be a part of it. But even though the girl is a little scared of him sometimes, she thinks he's a nice enough guy because of his facial features and beautiful green eyes. At this point, Mason came to them. Would he continue to prove to the Emperor that he needed to reflect on his behavior? He said that a while back he did go too far when he threatened Count Nolan, to which Declan asked if he'd had any other choice. Mason decided to warn that if this situation happened again, more and more aristocrats would start turning away from him. And since he became Emperor, he's gotten even more aggressive. So the guy asked if he wanted to get to the point where most aristocrats wouldn't want to associate with him. To which the Emperor replied that if he had come to point out his mistakes, he could leave at once, for he did not want to hear anything. When Chloe heard this conversation, she fully supported Mason's opinion. Declan really needs to listen to the people who are trying to help him sometimes. Besides, Mason doesn't advise him to do anything wrong, but instead tries to do what's best for him. When he looked at Chloe, she immediately noticed his frightened look and didn't realize what she had to do with the situation. It turns out that when Declan listens to her advice, which he came up with himself, while saying that it was her idea, because of this, all people are very afraid of her and see her as a cursed puppet who commands the emperor to take revenge on everyone around them. And it was very unfair, for she was on the contrary a very kind girl, who never had bad intentions and never advised anything of the sort. Originally this doll was in Chloe's arms almost from birth. She received a lot of love, but why she became so cruel is unknown. And it was at that moment that Chloe realized something. And if it was true, she certainly wouldn't want that kind of future. If she's a doll, the story says she'll end up in a bad situation that she remembers very well from the time she read the novella. It'll just break in half, and breaking the doll means it will die that way. Is it destined to die from just being broken? I'm surprised she didn't remember that sooner. Now all her thoughts were only on what she could do to avoid perishing. She began to think, how could it be prevented? Because there's gotta be some way, and apparently she had an idea. She needs to change Declan's fate, because to people she is like his second personality. Everyone is sure that he listens to her, and his actions depend only on her. And if he does not die, she will also be safe, because as long as he is alive he can protect her. But if he dies, there will be many people left who will want to destroy her, because she's the reason a lot of people got hurt, except no one realizes that she had nothing to do with it. From this point on, she began her plan by which she would save the chief tyrant of this novel by any means necessary. She doesn't like his character and some oddities in his behavior, but even so, she has to save him, because her life depends on it. Meanwhile, Mason continues to try to get the Emperor to change his attitude and become less cruel. He asked him to try to put thoughts of defending the Empire out of his head, for it was making him a very unpredictable tyrant, who is feared and tried to be avoided by all the people who live in the Empire. The main reason for the Emperor's death, actions that have to do with protecting the Empire and trying to make it stronger. He is constantly involved in battles, and as a result of his actions, Declan only destroys the country. The decisive moment for him was when he finally lost the support of those around him. If there was no attempt to defend their territory, the main character, Stella, would not have been taken hostage. The reason Mason, the man closest to Declan, turned his back on him was to save his beloved Stella. So all she has to do is stop any action, thought, talk, or attempt related to the defense of the Empire's territories. If she does do it, she won't die and she'll live a safe and secure life. In the meantime, Declan is trying to prove to Mason his point that it's his responsibility to protect the territory, so he has to make the Empire the most powerful, and no matter how many people try to change his mind, his opinion will remain the same. After saying that, the girl didn't understand why Declan was so stubborn, because if he didn't listen to someone, he risked getting killed. Mason said that his words look like an excuse, because everyone knows perfectly well that he intends to take revenge on everyone, and the defense of the territory has nothing to do with it. He also said that lately he's been thinking only about himself, and even started talking to his dead sister's doll, although it's high time to get over it and stop blaming someone else. Because it happens, but you have to deal with it, because the further away he gets, the more dangerous he becomes to others. He asked Declan to stop feeling guilty for her demise, because he had done enough as it was, to which the Emperor replied that he didn't want to talk about it, and if Mason didn't stop, he would order him to leave. And afterward, Declan looked at him with a very angry look, and tried to make it clear that if he didn't leave, he would regret it very much. After that, Mason decided to leave after all, because he'd done his best. Apparently the memory of his sister made him so angry that he asked a friend who wanted to do what was best to leave. Chloe at that moment dreamed of only one thing, that she would learn to talk so she could tell him everything she thought of him. Because it's very hard to keep quiet at times like this, but all she can do is just talk about something and have no influence on what's going on. At that moment, Declan touched Chloe and said he was sorry he couldn't hear her voice again and talk to her like a human being. She saw in his eyes that he missed his sister, and apparently really wanted revenge on everyone involved in her death. The girl looked straight into his eyes for the first time, and for the first time she saw his kind look. Now she felt embarrassed for the bad words she had said about him earlier. Apparently she was the only one he looked at with love and tenderness. Now, The girl was beginning to think that maybe it really did hurt him a lot to remember his sister. And she even wanted to support him, because she knew how hard it was to have no support from others, and instead be seen as a tyrant. And he just misses his sister. And if it were him, he'd probably do the same thing. He's got some weirdness, but it's not his fault. When evening came, he took care of Chloe, covered her with a blanket, and wished her a pleasant sleep. Maybe someday someone will understand him, because there's nothing wrong with wanting revenge on the man who killed his sister. Before he goes to sleep, he usually kisses Chloe on the cheek and imagines that the next morning it'll all be a bad dream and he'll see his sister again. When the girl saw him trying to kiss her, she really didn't want to. But luckily it wasn't what she thought it would be. Even though his actions may surprise and frighten some people, he is still a loving brother who never forgets about his sister for a second. I'm sure she'd be very happy to know how much he loves her. At times like this, Chloe wishes she wasn't so close to him. But unfortunately, there's nothing she can do about it. She is so sick of being completely dependent on someone for everything that she wants to learn to move and talk, even though it's probably just not possible. But more than that, she wanted to prevent and change her fate. But how could she do that if she couldn't talk or move? The girl wondered if she was destined to accept it and just wait for the moment when she died. She is still very angry when she remembers that she is destined to die, and yet there is no chance to prevent it. Besides, she still doesn't know. What could be the point of her appearing in this world, since she is just a doll, on which nothing depends on her? The girl misses her parents very much, but right now she can only hope that they are safe now. She really wished this day was just a bad dream that would soon be over. She wants, when she opens her eyes, she wants to see the ceiling of the hospital room, but for now, she's forced to sleep next to Declan and wish she had a chance to make a difference. But so far she's the only one he's treated well, so she has nothing to worry about. When suddenly he started hugging her, and it was the most unpleasant moment for her. And the worst thing about it was that she had to endure it. But that wasn't all. It turns out Declan sometimes talks in his sleep, but Chloe didn't know that yet. He began to beg Chloe not to go away from him and not to leave him alone. Then he began to cry and hug her. He apologized for not being able to protect her. Apparently he really loved his sister so much that he even remembers her in his dreams. Chloe immediately felt a sense of sadness and heartache spread throughout her body. It was because he was touching her now. In the original story, the whole plot revolves around the main character, Mason, and it didn't describe Declan's heartache in any way. So when the girl read the novella, she didn't recognize how strong it was. Declan is not given a part of the plot, so no one knows how much he suffered alone. Since the girl also at some point was left without parents, she understands him. But unfortunately she can't support him and talk about this topic. She really wants him to feel better so he never cries at night. But how to do it she doesn't understand. Whether she'll never get it to move. I have a very strong desire to let him know she is there for him, and he can count on her support. Only I lack the ability to talk and move to do so. She was able to move her hand from one place to another. It was amazing, because it turns out that if she tries, she can do what she wants. It just takes a little effort. She was very surprised that she was now holding her hand near his face, and that she had managed to do it as if she were a real person. Chloe thought that it just couldn't be. After all, she had been trying to do this all day, and she was sure that it just wasn't possible. And if Declan saw it, it would be interesting to see his reaction. Because he doesn't know yet that she's not just a doll. She can think, and has apparently learned some moves. Chloe had been convinced all along that she was doomed to be a doll who could do nothing. But it turned out that she had hidden capabilities she didn't even realize she had. But when she tried to put her hand back, unfortunately for some reason she couldn't do it. But why does that happen? As suddenly she felt a headache, but did not realize what it was connected with. From that moment, some time had passed, and she still hadn't managed to get her hand back, so she just regarded his face, and once more convinced that he was handsome enough, and if he hadn't been a tyrant, she would have fallen in love with him at first sight. As suddenly, something inexplicable began to happen, and it was too fast. Chloe did not understand what was happening to her at all. After all, it had never happened before, plus she had no control over anything. She felt like she was losing consciousness. At that, Chloe still didn't understand what was happening, because she was just resting and wasn't too tired. And at that moment, her eyes began to close and she abruptly lost consciousness. But what happened to her? After a while, morning came. And was it really just a dream? for she was still in that room, next to Declan, who had woken up a little earlier, all the while watching her like he usually does. When he saw that Chloe was finally awake, he suggested that she shower and go to breakfast, but she was very surprised that he said she was asleep. It turns out she passed out last night from a bad headache, but luckily she's fine now. When suddenly, Chloe remembered something strange before going to sleep, when she lost consciousness. At that moment, she heard some voice, though perhaps she just imagined it. It was as if they were trying to save her, and some people were talking among themselves about taking her somewhere, but the girl tried not to think about it. But unfortunately she didn't succeed, for can a doll really faint or need to sleep? For if so, she really is a cursed doll. But then how do you explain what happens to her soul and what her mission is in this body? But what's even more frustrating is that she can't even discuss it with anyone, and even if she tried, no one would hear her. And usually at times like this, she doesn't want him to come near her. But really, there was nothing wrong with that. He just wanted to offer to brush her hair because it was really messed up. She still feels uncomfortable when he touches her or tries to talk to her, because it looks like he's talking to himself. She never got the coveted view in the hospital room, and the worst thing for her in this situation is that she's in the real world, and it's actually happening. Declan suddenly said that if she was hurt, to tell him, but how could he really think he'd get any kind of response from her? At that moment, a guy came to see him, but before he came in, he asked for permission. It turns out he just wanted to ask if he slept well, to which the Emperor asked if he himself could not see it, and afterwards asked him to leave these formalities aside, to which the guy replied that it wasn't a technicality, as he said he really cared that the Emperor had a good and productive night's sleep. And afterward he said he was the only one who wished him a good morning, because everyone else usually bypassed him. Chloe thought that this guy was really strange, as if he didn't know what he was talking about, and didn't know that the Emperor was standing in front of him, who usually didn't like to hear such things. Declan was getting sick of listening to this guy, so he decided to let him know that he wasn't comfortable talking to him after all, and it would be nice if he left after all. But apparently this man was clueless, and he still hasn't realized that he's come here for nothing, because he's not welcome here. And at one point when Chloe heard Declan call this guy by name, she realized who he was. Noah is one of the closest people to the Emperor. He is his subordinate, even though the original story said that Noah was not afraid of the Emperor at all, and treated him better than anyone else. The girl didn't think it was really true. She couldn't even imagine that Declan could have people he was good with. Well, or at least better than the others. It turns out that they have a good relationship for a reason. Many years ago, there was a situation that brought them into a good relationship. They hadn't known each other until then, and the guy didn't even expect it to be possible. At some point, Declan came up to him. The Emperor saved the guy while the defense of his territories in the Empire was going on, so Noah has remained loyal to the Emperor since then. Let his behavior be bold enough, but you can see how he genuinely wants to take care of Declan. And up until today, he asks every time he gets a good night's sleep. And apparently when Emperor Bad answered him, it wasn't serious. Apparently they just have this unusual relationship. Or was the Emperor just in a bad mood? It feels like Noah is treating his master's doll well with all sincerity, not just for the sake of ticking it off. Chloe is sure that Noah is one of the few people Declan can trust. He even compliments her sometimes, to which the Emperor replies that he agrees with him completely. After a while, and they went somewhere, Noah walking beside him the whole time, apparently to control what was going on, as suddenly Declan stopped abruptly, but it's not clear what exactly he didn't like yet. After that, he looked at one girl, wondering if she'd done something wrong. He immediately turned his attention to her and asked her one question. Turns out he didn't like that she didn't greet him and the princess. To him it seemed disrespectful to Chloe. That's why he was so indignant. The girl didn't expect him to take it seriously as disrespect from the assistant towards him. Suddenly Declan wanted to punish her for it, but Noah tried to defend her and explained that she was new and didn't know how to behave properly in his presence yet. To give her a small chance, the Emperor asked her to answer one question, namely, who is Chloe to him? To which the girl replied that Chloe is a little sister to him, whom he loves very much. Even though the assistant answered correctly, it had no effect on his decision. And at this moment, Chloe dreamed of only one thing, that she succeeded in stopping him, and that the not guilty girl did not die because someone was in a bad mood, But you could tell by the look in his eyes that he was too determined, and he was really unstoppable. But where did he get his anger from? When Chloe felt that she was really powerless in this situation, something strange began to happen. She began to see things that others could not see. It appeared that the girl sensed that there was some danger upstairs, and it was some kind of chandelier that was about to fall. Apparently it wasn't secured properly. But no matter how hard she tried, she still couldn't get a single word out and somehow warn him that it was best to move away from this place. But after that, he did notice that the chandelier from above began to hang too precariously, and it was very dangerous to be near it. Besides, it was very heavy and large. Chloe at this moment felt only hopelessness, because even her ability to see that the danger is about to happen does not help her, because she still cannot run away or say anything. But will the Emperor be able to see the danger in time to keep Chloe safe? When suddenly this chandelier did fall, and from it a lot of sharp parts flew around, which could easily be liked if you do not step back in time. It all happened so fast that the girl didn't even see the chandelier fall to the floor. Then she heard Declan's voice asking her if she was all right and if she had any injuries. But she seemed to be fine, and the Emperor had exaggerated as usual, and mistakenly thought that something might have happened to her, since he had been by her side all this time. Declan started talking to her and said she scared him a lot. He was already thinking something serious might have happened to her. I don't think she got hurt because the guy reacted in time and protected her, so she didn't even feel anything. And at that moment, the girl seemed to realize that if he hadn't protected Chloe, she would have been crushed. And at that moment, when the Emperor was considering whether Chloe had any injuries, he was approached by that guy, and said that Declan has a very large lesion visible near his neck and back, to which he replied that there was no need to panic, because he was fine. If the guy hadn't told him about it, he wouldn't have even felt any pain, although maybe he actually felt everything, just didn't want to tell anyone about it. And as usual, Noah didn't listen to him, and started convincing him to get a doctor, because if you don't, there could be very bad consequences. And so Declan listened to him and said, let him do what he wants. As suddenly, the Emperor for the first time in all this time asked the assistant to look after Chloe, because before, he did not give her to anyone, and constantly controlled her. He felt that if he entrusted it to anyone, something bad might happen. Chloe was very grateful to him for saving her, but still, his health was much more important than the doll's integrity. Afterward, the girl wondered what she had felt in that moment before the chandelier fell. It was as if her whole life had flown before her eyes, and it felt like that moment lasted less than a second, so she didn't even realize what was happening. But as it turned out, it was not just that, in fact. The girl saw a sign that suggests that the moment has come when a person should die. But for some reason, it did not happen. When the Emperor started to be asked how he was feeling, it was very unusual for him, so he felt too uncomfortable, because he was sure it wasn't sincere, and really didn't care how he felt. Besides, Declan kept saying that nothing serious had happened, so there was no need to worry about him. Mason began to tell him that if he died, the entire empire would be in danger. And didn't he know it himself? To which the Emperor replied that, in his opinion, nothing terrible had happened, because it could have happened any day. Although in fact, this situation was not an accident. Even in this situation, he's more worried about Chloe than himself. Despite his injury, he's only thinking about her. The girl noticed that these two guys cared about him so much that they even raised their voices. But the Emperor didn't care about it. Apparently he still didn't realize that there were people who could care about him. But at the same time, she was well aware that for a man who was often injured, a scratch like that meant nothing, and apparently he'd just gotten used to it long ago. But as far as she knew, after he became Emperor, he hadn't received a single injury or scratch. Even when he personally defended the territories of his empire, he was whole and unharmed, because his subordinates were doing all his work for him. But there was an accident that wasn't in the original story, so Chloe couldn't remember that moment, and it could possibly be a consequence of his obsession with her. In other words, this Declan trauma is a huge problem, because her integrity and safety rests entirely on his well-being. At this point, they started talking about that assistant. The guys tried to explain to him that she did it because she was inexperienced, so she should be forgiven because she didn't do it on purpose. To which the Emperor replied that if he so often forgave mistakes to his female assistants, there would be more and more such situations. But the fact that Chloe ended up being okay was the most important thing to him. Afterwards, he thanked the guy for pushing him at the right moment, though it wasn't really him. If the girl could talk, she'd tell him it was all thanks to her. Everything that's been going on lately seems too weird. She's finding out some new abilities she didn't even know she had. Chloe realized what was happening, and at that moment she started waving her arms desperately, trying to save herself somehow. And after that I concluded that if she sincerely wants to do something, she will definitely do it. After that, Noah decided to wonder how the Emperor would act toward that assistant, and whether he would try to punish her for the way he thought she had disrespected Chloe, to which the Emperor replied that she was very much at fault because he seemed scary to her, so he must show all people what real fear is, so that such things would not happen again. But the guys didn't even know how to react to that. They didn't answer him anything, because they were sure it was just useless. Even Chloe doesn't know how to change this man, because he never listens to anyone, and still tries to be very cruel to everyone, even though he is not really like this. If he was a real tyrant or villain, he would even treat Chloe that way. But there are still those people he treats well, and sometimes even takes their advice. So, he's not the real villain he's trying to appear to be. How suddenly she does make up her mind and try to fix it. Chloe tries everything she can to at least move a little and let him know he's wrong. As suddenly, even Declan seems to notice something, and feel some movement on her part. But he just seems so disbelieving that he's trying to find an excuse for what he just felt. Even the guys didn't pay attention to it, and thought they were just imagining it, because they were too sure that the doll couldn't just move like that for them not to notice it. And when Declan did realize that Chloe had just picked up and punched his stomach, and yet he definitely hadn't imagined it, no one believed him anyway. The only thing they told him was that he needed to go to his room and finally get some rest, because the last few days, that's what he needed. Apparently no one really believed him, though it's not surprising. How could anyone believe that an ordinary doll could move, much less hit someone? And since the Emperor was sure that he certainly hadn't imagined it, he went straight to his room, and the only thing he wanted her to do was to do it again. If it happens, he seems to start believing in miracles. He even asked her to hit him so he could see it again just once. He was so interested in it that he asked her if she could not fulfill her beloved brother's request. But in order to do so, she would have to accumulate a great deal of strength, and only then, perhaps, would she be able to do it. After all, it is not as easy as it may seem to him. Each of her movements requires a lot of strength and energy, which is very quickly spent. And yet, it's very hard to accumulate, so she has to wait a while before she can show it to him. And Declan seems to have figured out a way to make sure she does. He said that if she didn't move, he would punish that maid the next morning, and apparently that was a very good method of doing it. At that moment she was very angry with him, for how could he punish people who were innocent for no reason? He just doesn't realize how hard it is for her. The girl realized that this man really doesn't care about other people's feelings, and she can't believe that a few days ago, she felt sorry for him. She's too sick of putting up with it. But the only thing she lacks is the freedom to do what she thinks is right. As suddenly, the Emperor decided to speed up the moment when she would listen to him. So he said that tomorrow he would definitely punish that girl, and that her fate depended only on Chloe. It made her so much angrier that she finally decided to strike, and gathered all the strength she needed to do so, which was already far too little. At that moment, Declan didn't even notice the blow. He was surprised by what he had just seen. His sister was back to him, and it was an unforgettable experience for him. In his eyes there was simultaneous surprise, wariness, not realizing what was happening, and many other feelings he was experiencing at that moment. It wouldn't be surprising if he couldn't talk for a while after that. After all, to see that a doll that never moved, thanks to one request, hit him, is just amazing and like magic. Only it wasn't the reaction she expected to see from him. It seems at that moment, he forgot what pain, resentment, anger, and hatred were. He told her that her favorite brother could give her anything she wanted, and then said that so be it, he would not harm the maid either, and she would go on working as if nothing had happened. And that's exactly what the girl wanted, and that's the only way she could have influenced it. When suddenly Chloe moved again, whether she wanted to tell him something else, or still found the strength, and wanted to hit him again. After that, she somehow got up and started walking somewhere. Declan couldn't believe his eyes, and at the same time he asked her to do it more often, and not hide her emotions. But for the moment, Those emotions were not joyful at all, but rather the opposite. All she wanted was for him to stop being so cruel, and at least sometimes start thinking about someone other than himself. Declan promised that he would fulfill her wish, because after that, he would do anything to get her to show some activity. When Chloe heard that, she still didn't believe him, because she knows he'll never change. And after that, he said words that she didn't expect to hear. Declan remembered that she had always been a very kind girl, so he decided to follow her example and be kind to his helpers and the people around him. It was very surprising for the girl that he made such a conclusion after too many years. And at that, only due to this situation, Chloe did not expect that such a tyrant listened to his younger sister in everything, because in her opinion, it shouldn't be like that. But even so, she's still very happy that she was able to influence the fate of the assistant he wanted to punish. Now she finally understands how she's going to make any movement at all, and maybe after a while, she'll learn how to do it without any problems and many fruitless attempts. But the main thing she realized was that she could easily influence his decision, and if she needed to, she could change his mind, and she was finally free from the role of a useless puppet who could do nothing. Then, Chloe wondered why, in a place where she should be comfortable and happy to be, that wasn't happening. Instead, she felt sad for some reason, and had a feeling that something was wrong. Declan looks at her and he seems to get tears of happiness. He said it would be really nice if she was really alive and he could touch her like he did years ago. Except he doesn't know something very important yet, which is that she's not actually, in Chloe's body, the real Chloe. But it seems like it would be much better if he never found out, and if he did, he would probably turn into the worst villain imaginable. But since the girl didn't want it, it would be better if this information was kept secret. That way a lot of lives and moods of people who just happen to be around him can be saved this way. If he is once again convinced that he will never really see or feel the presence of his sister Chloe, he will be very disappointed and will stop trusting anybody. Chloe finds herself in the body of a doll by some unknown accident, and she feels as if she has caused him to mistakenly hope for the best, when in fact, it will never happen. And unfortunately, she also cannot affect it. And so far her main goal is to do anything to change his fate and the fate of the Emperor, because only so they can stay alive and not die. After that, the Emperor didn't stop there. He wanted more. When he turned to her, Chloe didn't think it would be enough for him. Declan said he was very grateful to her for what she had done, but afterward asked for some word to be spoken, as it had been years ago, so he could hear her beautiful voice again. But that wasn't all. Declan offered to play with her like they had in their beautiful and happy childhood. But it was obvious from her face that she didn't want that at all, and didn't understand what the point of it was. But he was too insistent. Apparently he's too eager to bring back all the times when they could play. There were no problems, and they could see each other every day, not even knowing that someday they'd dream about it. The girl remembers the times when he was much more masculine, and no one would even suggest that he might be sad about someone, crying every night to his room, or anything like that. Usually everyone was convinced that he was a real tyrant, and not capable of being happy about anything. Even the people around him tried not to get close to him, because it usually ended badly. Suddenly, a very unpleasant situation began to happen. The girl felt a very familiar feeling, which she had felt recently. She began to feel dizzy. She felt very ill. Chloe was sure that she could pass out at any second. And the worst thing about this situation was that it happened too often, and she still hadn't found out the reason, or at least a way to prevent it. She suddenly felt weak all over her body, dizzy, and it felt very hard to move, and then she could not control her eyes, and they gradually began to close. She still hasn't learned how to control her condition and her body, because these situations happen too often, and it would be nice to figure it out. When suddenly she barely started to hear someone's voice saying some name. It was very familiar to her. It was Eric's name. When suddenly she woke up in the body of the same doll, only next to her was the real Chloe, who talked to her and called her Erica. It turns out that the real Chloe wanted to ask the doll if she could trust her, because in this situation, it's really important and necessary. Plus, as many know, in fact, she and her brother are being planned to be destroyed by someone, as there is no one in the Imperial Palace on their side, and one who treats them well. Chloe says she's the only one who can protect her big brother, but she doesn't have any power at all. so she can't do anything. And afterward, she asked Erica if she knew what her brother had said. If blisters appear in place of those abrasions, it means she'll get stronger. But so far it was unknown when that would actually happen. And also, the girl told that recently there was a very unpleasant situation. She and her brother tried to poison them, and for this they put something in their food when they did not see it. After that, Chloe really wondered what would happen if she really did die before her brother. And there was no way she could help him or hold him in the right moment. Everything was happening so realistically that the girl didn't realize if it was all a dream or if she had just found herself in the past to remember something very important. And at one point, Chloe asked if Erica could protect her brother instead of her, because she was sure she couldn't do it on her own, and she felt she was destined to die soon. Even then, she knew very well that if a situation happened where she died before her brother did, he would be very sad and would never forget that day, as he loved her very much. So Chloe asked Erica, after she was gone, to tell her brother that it wasn't his fault, and that she was sorry that the emergency had happened, and she had to leave him alone, as much as she didn't want to. And also to say very important words that she loves him very much, and very much wants him to live on, and be the happiest person in the world, because that is the most important thing. And that was all she wanted to give him with her Erica doll. After she said those words that she loved her brother very much, her mood improved a lot. She was very happy, and at one point she remembered that tomorrow was a very special day, and that her brother is taking part in some competition. So, this day is also very important for her as it is for him. And after that, she asked the doll, "Doesn't that sound very cool?" After that, the girl began to see some strange moments, and it was no longer like reality, but she still did not fully realize what was really happening, whether it was a dream or not. Everything she saw next, she was more and more unable to understand what it could mean. That what was happening was something between an incomprehensible dream or traveling back in time, both of which she didn't like, because she didn't understand anything. At one point she saw herself in some room and Declan walk in on her. But the thing is, it was obvious from his condition that something unpleasant had happened, or something that was unexpected and upset him greatly. But at some point, he started saying his sister's name, and he looked very sad. So the girl started to speculate that maybe it was the same day his sister died. He kept saying his name too, looked at the floor with very much surprised eyes, and was all in tears, as if something really terrible had happened. But since he hasn't said anything yet, it was too early to assume anything, because maybe it's not what it seems at first glance. And then, she remembered Chloe's words, asking her to protect her brother and give him the support he needed at this time, and that for some reason he was in danger. But she did not know what it was, for she had not told her any details, nor had she warned her of what might happen. But after a while, Chloe finally came to her senses, and it turns out it was another time when, after the pain in her head, she just fell asleep. Apparently it really did turn out to be a dream, which turned out to be so vivid, as if everything was happening in reality. The girl even started to feel a little sad and cried because she experienced a lot of emotions. And at that moment, the girl realized exactly who she had just seen, and who was talking to her. She recognized her by her appearance, which was like a copy of the doll she was in. It was obvious to her now that she, the girl she'd just dreamed about, was Declan's little sister, Chloe. She of course had heard that the relationship between them was special and very good, but she never thought it was so perfect. She found out that the real Chloe was a very nice girl, and now she could see why her brother loved her so much. Seeing with her own eyes the brother and sister story mentioned in the original story makes her feel uncomfortable, but it is still a mystery to her why she is having such unusual dreams, which, apparently, she has to draw some conclusions and do something. But she is not clear what she needs to do. When she dreamed about Declan's sister Chloe, she was very curious to see if there was something she wanted to tell her, or tell her what was best to do in a particular situation, or at least to understand what she was in the body of the doll that Chloe spent all her time with was for. And after a few minutes, the girl finally realized the meaning of the dream, because it was much more obvious than she thought. The real Chloe only wanted the girl to protect her brother instead of her, and also asked that he would definitely survive, and after that, be the happiest man in the world. But still, something remained a big mystery to her, to which she wanted to know at least some answer. Why Chloe had asked her to do it, if the girl had nothing to do with it. and even more, did not know how to do it. After all these people are just minor characters in a story she's been reading recently. But suddenly, she had thoughts that maybe she was still just having a vivid dream that would soon end. But at the same moment, she knew for sure that this was her new reality, in which she had a special task that she had to fulfill. But if someone would at least tell her a little bit about how it could be done, it would be a lot easier on her. And it turns out that she still doesn't know what she is capable of, or even what may happen in the near future. Because in this new reality, everything is so unpredictable that it is impossible to plan anything. Things change too fast. There were many moments when she wanted to hit him or feel sorry for him. But still, one thing she knows for sure, he's a great brother. And at one point, the girl made a decision that she would fulfill his sister's request, even if it was impossible. So, she began to come up with a new plan to make it happen. But there is one very important point. If they want to save him, they need to make him obey her in any way possible. From now on, since she has learned how to move her body, she has the opportunity to fulfill her mission. You have to think about how to influence the Emperor, or at best, re-educate him. As suddenly Chloe noticed that she hadn't seen him for a long time. Because of her thoughts, she completely stopped noticing everything around her. And since it is necessary and very important for her to control him, it is urgent to find him. And the sooner that happens, the better. Because of the fact that from the moment she got into the doll's body, they've been together all the time. Now that he's not around, she has a sense of anxiety. She has a feeling that something is wrong, like something is missing, or rather someone, even though she was angry with him. But when he's not around, she feels worse than when she is with him. And what was strangest of all, from the moment she woke up, the last thing she remembered was one very important phrase that she still hadn't forgotten, and remembered perfectly well, that Chloe's brother was in danger. And was this a sign that needed to be heeded? And maybe he really is in danger now, and he needs help. The girl immediately began to think where she could find him, and what could have happened to him. For he was the Emperor, and in his palace, he must be safe. She was already starting to think of the worst things that could happen to him because of this time. But really, it was for nothing. Because all this time, he was in a much smaller place than she thought. So there was no need to be nervous and worried about him and his safety at all. Chloe heard someone's footsteps, so she decided to see who was here, and it turned out to be him. Declan has been in the shower the whole time, and luckily he's okay, because nothing bad has happened that could hurt him in any way. He came right up to her, and he seemed to be in a good mood, which was not surprising since the girl made him very happy. But she didn't seem to be in the best of moods right now. His face was even flushed with excitement, for he hadn't even warned her, and she didn't know what was happening to him now. And when she did look at him, she wanted to ask him if he was okay, but instead, she didn't expect to see him like this. She immediately thought that he could use some clothes, because in his presence, at the moment, she felt uncomfortable. She had never seen him like this, and never even thought she would ever see him like this, so it was a little stressful for her. Although it wasn't really a big deal, the girl was probably just scared from the moment he wasn't around, and that's why she reacted that way. Afterward, he suggested that she go to breakfast, for it was already a good time for a good meal, for the cook had probably prepared something very tasty for them. In the meantime, they had already come to breakfast, and the assistant had brought for them various dishes which they could select for themselves according to their taste and preferences. But apparently the Emperor is still oblivious to the fact that Chloe can't eat breakfast anyway, though maybe she can learn to do that too. When suddenly, she saw something very dangerous that could seriously harm the Emperor. Thanks to her ability, she saw something strange. When the assistant was bringing the Emperor another version of breakfast, the girl noticed that there was a bad energy coming from this place. And then she knew for sure that this dish was poisoned, and he must under no circumstances taste it. Only for the time being it was unknown who could have done it. It's obvious that she's got to make sure he doesn't eat it. But is she strong enough? Because if he eats it, he'll be killed instantly? Afterward, when all the assistants had left this room, the Emperor proceeded to breakfast and wished the girl a pleasant appetite. But would she do nothing to... She tried her best to do everything she could to keep him from doing it. But unfortunately so far, he hasn't had the strength to do so. The only thing she could do was move her plate so that the Emperor would notice it and pay attention to her. And she succeeded. But unfortunately, she failed to make him understand not to eat the soup because it was poisoned. Afterward, Declan asked her why she was refusing to eat this incredibly delicious soup, because usually the cook makes all the best stuff, and she should taste it. But he doesn't seem to understand her at all, and he doesn't realize that he's about to make a very serious mistake that he'll regret. After that, the Emperor decided that she didn't have to eat it if she didn't want to. But that wasn't what she was trying to tell him, and he should pay more attention to what she was trying to tell him. And it's not that she doesn't like the dish at all. She's just trying to prevent something really awful from happening. But it's very interesting to find out who's involved. But at the moment, the girl is getting very angry, because so far, she's not getting anywhere. Suddenly, she has a few seconds left. If she doesn't do it now, it's too late, and there's probably no way to save him. And at some point, somehow or some miracle, she managed to say the phrase, "Don't eat that," in a way that he could hear it. He immediately looked at her, and couldn't believe he had just heard his sister's voice. Even Chloe didn't realize that he had heard her. It all happened so quickly that she didn't even have time to notice whether he had eaten the soup or not. Declan was so surprised that he didn't understand how he could have heard anything, and at the same time realized that he was definitely not wrong. As he reached out to retrieve the fallen spoon from the floor, he noticed some girl walking towards him, but he had no idea yet who he was about to see. And the best part is it hasn't started yet, it's just ahead of us. When he imagined for a second that this could be the girl he was thinking of, he started to have just incredible emotions. He was really shocked. And because of this, he accidentally fell off his chair, for he had not yet realized what had just happened, or whether he thought it was her. The first thing he thought was that none of this is real, when he saw the blonde hair, exactly like his sister's. And yet, the doll is right next to him. He thought of only one thing, that it turns out his sister is standing next to him. But is this even possible? Or was it the poison in the soup, and he is now seeing things that are not really happening? At that moment, the girl realized only that by some miracle she had spoken, and he had heard her. But all that happened after that seemed something impossible. But what it was really about, the moment had finally arrived when she had freely learned to move her hands, look at someone, and more, as well as speak. But so far, this was her first successful attempt at it. But still, what was the situation when the Emperor reached to pick up his spoon that had fallen to the floor, and how could his sister appear with him? Did it turn out to be that simple, and it's just the effects of the poison, so he's seeing things that aren't really there? When this girl asked if he could see her, he didn't even know if he could believe his own eyes in this situation. If this was all really happening, he would be the happiest person ever. Afterward, it was not clear whether the girl was real or not, but she began to wonder that he had been able to hear her. And then she said she understood his surprise perfectly well, for he had seen his sister, who had long since died. He must be incredibly stressed right now because this is too important for him, and from the looks of it, he's going to be very upset if it turns out to be anything like a dream. As suddenly, the girl saw the very poisoned soup on the table, and it was noticeable that she saw something suspicious in it. She went straight to it, and as if she knew what kind of soup it was, she decided she must get rid of it. But when she tried to take that plate, she couldn't. And apparently that's because she's not a real person. Although it's strange why she wonders about that, as if she didn't know it herself. And for some reason, she was very much surprised by it. Every minute everything that was happening in this room was becoming more incomprehensible. But after that, the Emperor decided to ask her one very important question, which she apparently did not expect him to ask her. He wondered very much if she was his 3 favorite sisters, Chloe, whom he missed very much. Did he see her so realistically that he actually thought she might have come back to him, and that such a thing was even possible? It seems that the effect of the poison is so strong that the Emperor does not even realize that there is no one but the doll, and that it would be better if, instead of talking to her, he went to a room and rested a little, or better still, went to a doctor. As suddenly, everything that was happening started to look even stranger. The girl tried to warn him that it was better not to approach her, but who she really was after all, and why he started to see her. Of course, the Emperor can be understood in this situation, because it is not his fault for what is happening now. And besides, to see his sister for him, it was like to realize his most important dream, or even better, he couldn't even distinguish and realize what was happening and how to react to it. because it was too sudden and too realistic. But it seemed to be the effects of the soup, if he had eaten it. But if not, there was no explanation for it. Could she really be a ghost? After all, she hadn't managed to touch the bowl of soup to throw it away. And did the Emperor not notice it? Though it wasn't surprising since he was only focused on what he thought of her. But still, if you scrutinize her appearance, it is impossible to find differences between her and the real Chloe. The guy seems completely unaware of what's happening to him, and whether he returns to normal depends solely on the effects of that horrible ingredient they put in his soup.